State employees went back to work today, ending 9 days of a rolling strike that affected all of the state agencies.
16,000 union members are now looking over the proposal that they will be voting on in the next 2 weeks. Lou Frederick joins us in the newsroom now, saying things are starting to get back to normal. Lou?
Pete, there was a sigh of relief, and everyone's just trying to figure out what the contract means to them, workers and managers.
Turn signal again. Right turn signal.
Whatever it means, doors opened on time this morning at state offices, and workers were there to staff the offices. Most went out with striking employees, others did not, and there was clearly some bitterness lingering. State offices in downtown Portland were back to normal. In Salem, OPEU members once out on the picket line were now inside, working as usual. Still, there were some who felt left out. Motor Vehicles Division drivers who until now got overtime for working on Saturday now will be paid their regular rate and scheduled based on seniority.
I probably will vote no, and the few people in the office that I've talked to, I don't think they're planning on, some of them are not going to ratify it.
Will that make a big difference? Do you think that's going to be the case?
No, because I think the majority of the state is happy with what they've got.
DMV drivers account for less than 4% of the union, and many do not expect that their concerns will influence ratification one way or the other. Governor Goldschmidt believes the state did very well in the negotiations, and yet still addressed some of the problems of the union members.
It was my goal to settle this strike in a way that would allow, and to settle these negotiations in a fashion that would allow both parties to feel that they were headed toward an agenda that would actually get us more product out of the same workforce. I don't think you do that by underpaying people. That's why I supported pay equity. I don't believe when you have people who are being paid so little that they have to be on food stamps, you will get productivity. What you get is turnover.
But he also says that the state was clearly successful in holding the line on wage hikes and requests to the emergency board.
And that point, I think, has to be made over and over and over and over again to our state workers. If they believe we're home free because we have a little bit more money in the state treasury than we did a few months ago, they haven't been out talking to Oregon ranchers, they haven't been out talking to Oregon cattlemen, they haven't been out talking to anybody, because basically what I see every place I go is people are barely making it, and we got to remember that.
Now the question is, who really won here? Well, no one knows. The union showed its solidarity, the state showed that it would not back down, and everyone expects that the next negotiations will carry the residue of this strike, and that is 2 years away. Tracy, Pete?
Lou, any long-term problems, you think, between those state workers who did not walk the picket lines and those who were out on strike?
Well, that's really unclear. In every strike situation, something like that happens, and some problem does take place. We were in the DMV offices today, and there were 2 workers who went back, who crossed the picket lines, and they were clearly being taken away. People weren't talking to them as much as they were earlier. So who knows how long that's going to last. There's obviously going to be some residue, and just what that will mean in the future, we don't know.
Thank you, Lou. Hopefully that can all be worked out in a short time. Well, the settlement is called a fair compromise by the union and the state. For the workers, the contract promises more pay. For the union, the dispute was a political gamble that it won. And for the state, the settlement is fairly close to what it first offered. We get details of the proposal from Steve Knight.
Contract! When do we want it? Now!
The workers risked their jobs. Their union risked its political future in the strike. The pay raises they demanded, says the state, would have cost $50 million. The pay raises they got cost less than half of that. The workers' wages rise by 2% retroactive to last July. They'll increase by another 4% in January 1989. The cost, $23.7 million, exactly the amount the state had budgeted for pay raises. Pay equity raises of between 5 and 10% will be given to 5,500 OPEU workers now deemed underpaid. The union won on health insurance. The state will pay employees premiums. Plus, workers get a so-called flex benefit starting in November 1988. It's a one-time payment of $70, plus $20 a month to pay for improved medical insurance or child care. The cost, $8.4 million. The state won on the seniority issue. The current policy of basing layoffs on seniority and performance continues. The union wanted seniority most important when the state determined layoffs, promotions, and transfers. The workers are being asked by the union to ratify the contract. If they do, the union scores the biggest victory. Not only is it the largest state employee union, but it becomes the only one to have staged a successful strike. The OPEU grows far more powerful, a political benefit of immeasurable value. In Portland, Steve Knight, News 8.
The strike and its successful settlement bring tonight's commentary from our news analyst, John Tuttle.
Neil Goldschmidt is no fool. The one thing he wasn't going to do today was announce the state had won the strike. But the governor's spirits were high this morning, and he was ready to talk about just how much the 9-day rolling strike had hurt Oregon.
So maybe it would have been lethal if it had gone on for 3 or 4 or 5 months. Maybe it wouldn't have been, I don't know. But if I were the other side, I wouldn't bet the bank that that strategy over a 6-month or a year period would collapse the governor a heap and find me wallowing in tears on the floor of my office, let me put it that way.
By the nature of the strikers' work, the victims of this short strike were those who depend on state services, those at the state hospitals or welfare food stamp clients. In 9 days, those within the general population who were most inconvenienced were probably the people who had to do business with the Department of Motor Vehicles, a state agency where delay and inconvenience is almost a tradition, even when there is no strike. Like the governor, most of us probably could have withstood 6 months more without collapsing in tears. The fortunate news is we won't have to find out for sure. In the aftermath of the 9-day walkout, the governor and his state managers have made it through the negotiations without substantial changes in their original offer. And the union has emerged with new prestige and solidarity. The OPEU is a proven labor force, seasoned by a shared ordeal, and rightfully expecting a greater voice in state labor decisions. Both sides escaped without the animosities that could mar future negotiations. This was, after all, a labor dispute and not a war. What was needed was a settlement and not a clear victory for either side. And that's what we got. I'm John Tuttle.
Oregon public employees returned to work this morning following yesterday's strike settlement, but very few are celebrating just yet. We stopped by strike headquarters earlier this afternoon.
Taking the strong and the weak and putting it together so that we can read.
The phones haven't stopped all day. Even though the picket signs are back in the corner and people are back to work, many members of the OPEU aren't yet sure what they're celebrating.
We're really concerned about the settlement of the contract. They want to know why we settled for anything less than 4.5.
Volunteers are doing their best to explain the complicated package of increases and benefits.
Okay, well, we did get retroactive 2% to July. And are they understanding the $70 bonus and the $20 bonuses?
But even with some explanation, many members are ill at ease about the new agreement.
Yeah, you hear one thing in the paper, one thing on TV. We've received some written information, but I don't think it really is clear.
There's supposed to be a $20 a month personal benefit, and I don't know for sure what that means. There's another $70 one-time payment that we're going to receive, and that's nice, but I don't understand it.
In essence, the contract provides a minimal salary increase together with policies that protect seniority and medical benefits for union members. A few employees will get big raises under a pay equity agreement. OPEU leaders are confident that once those points are clear, most people will be very pleased.
You know, when you look at 2%, retroactive July 1st, you spend 9 days on strike, you go, wait a minute, are they letting me down? And then you take a chance and you get to look at it and you figure out, well, in the long run, we're going to be on the average of about 4% more on our wages than we would have been if we hadn't gone on strike, and 4% is pretty significant.
Members say they hope that's true, but until they can meet to discuss and ratify the agreement, they'll remain uneasy.
I was hoping for a sense of relief and clarity, and that hasn't come.
At least not yet.
Not yet.
OPEU members will begin formal discussion of their proposed contract next week and should vote to ratify it within 2 weeks. Paul?
Well, state workers were off the picket line and back on the job today. The Oregon Public Employees Union strike ended yesterday with a tentative settlement. Workers will vote on ratification next week. In the aftermath of the strike, Executive Department Director Fred Miller assessed the damage to state government.
It's hard to evaluate because in terms of money, we of course had some fairly significant savings. We weren't having salaries on the payroll, and we figured $88,000 per day per 1,000 people. But of course there are productivity losses, and people are spending time doing less than productive things. And when the workers are back, we'll have to catch up with the work they weren't doing. So we'll use those savings that way.
According to Miller, state government was back up to speed this morning, although he says there is a little backlog of work because of the strike.
Meanwhile, Governor Goldschmidt says he feels good about the tentative agreement reached between the state and its largest union. The pact, of course, still needs to be ratified by the membership of OPEU before it becomes official. The governor says he hopes both union and management can begin to put this behind them now, and Trish Nyworth has more on that.
The press conference was on TriMet appointments, but it was no surprise where the focus was this first day after the state's largest union ended its walkout. The tentative agreement reached yesterday reflects the governor's bottom line on the major issues like salaries and insurance. But Goldschmidt was reluctant to claim the state the big winner.
As is ought to be the case with collective bargaining, everybody gets to make their points, and when you sign the agreement, anybody who goes out telling anybody that they were the complete winners is asking for trouble in the next collective bargaining session, so I wouldn't want to make that claim.
The strike itself was something the governor believes he couldn't have stopped.
I think they had decided they were going to strike no matter what. I think the fact that they demonstrated to their own members that they could stick together is going to be of value to them. If the argument that you can make is that that makes them tougher at the bargaining table and that they will get things that otherwise they wouldn't get next time, I wouldn't be so quick to say that, no.
Now, with the pickets coming down, the 16,500 state employees represented will get back to the business of running state government. Ratifying the tentative agreement still must take place. But an end to this first ever strike does not necessarily mean a stop to the ill will it fostered, something the governor says still must be resolved.
But it does concern me. From the union standpoint, they've got to sit their people down and explain the facts of life. That all of that is over. It's time to go back to work. And we have already begun to do the same thing with our folks.
In Portland, Trish Nyworth, the 10 o'clock news.